Now, those native tribes of Chicago actually had a name in reference to these lands, and they referred to this area as Chicagois. And that is ultimately where that name Chicago comes from, Chicagois. Now that is an Algonquin term that roughly translates to skunk onion, or if you're even simplifying it even from there, you can translate it down to stinky onion or stinky garlic. Yeah, so why? That's the big question. Well, the main reason had to do with the smell. Back then, right, swampy marshland, and along the banks of the Chicago River, there were wild onions and wild garlic growing. As that would rot, the smell would permeate throughout these lands, so that just became the name over the years, Chicagois, Chicago. So if you take it at face value, each city. Now, it was not until the late 1770s that the first non-indigenous permanent settler made his way here. His name was Jean-Baptiste Pointe du Sable, and you see, du Sable was an immigrant of Haiti of French and African descent, whose mother was a Haitian slave and father a French mariner. He actually started out down in New Orleans, traveled his way up a variety of different rivers until he finally settled here. Once again, the main appeal was the fur trade. So he lived in tandem with the Potawatomi people, and he established a fur trading outpost that was located pretty much where the modern day Apple store is, next to Michigan Avenue. So we're going to pass right by it a little bit later on. I know, kind of ironic, right? The founder of Chicago, starting that industry into the city that we have today, although if we're really tracing it back, has to do with those native tribes. But still though, lots of things in Chicago named after him. For example, there to the right, this patchy grass area within the next few years is going to be turned into Du Sable Park. Coming up just behind me here is the major highway branching north to south. It's been renamed to Du Sable Lakeshore Drive. And then a little bit later on, next to that Apple store, you're going to see Michigan Avenue Du Sable Bridge, also named after that gentleman. So if you see that name around town, that's who it's in reference to. And that's some of our early history to set our table, get us ready for the modern day city. So it gets a little noisy under this bridge, but we're going to have this city open up. All right, my friends, here we go. We're going to get our first super architecture there to the left-hand side. That blue wavy glass building that is known as the St. Regis Chicago, formerly known as Vista Tower. St. Regis is the third tallest skyscraper currently here in our city. Stands at 1,191 feet tall. It's designed by an incredible Chicago local architect by the name of Jeannie Gang of Studio Gang Architecture firm. And that means that this building not only holds the record as the third tallest in Chicago, but is also the tallest skyscraper in the world ever designed by a woman and a woman-led architecture firm. Great way to start off our tour. Now this building here is mainly residential. You have a combination of hotels and residents, but we'll get to that in a second. For now, take a look to the far right, 17 floors from the top of that building. There are 2 floors worth of space kept open, and those are called blow-through floors. Yeah, pretty self-explanatory, right? They're kept open so the intense winds from the lake can blow straight through the top of the building, therefore alleviating the pressure off of the side of it. But that was actually not part of the building's original design. It had to be added in out of structural necessity. We should also really understand this. Skyscrapers all around the world are designed to safely blow and sway in the wind a couple of inches in each direction. The whole idea is that it's better for skyscrapers to bend in the wind rather than be too stiff and risk breaking the building's foundation. So, quite literally, they can just pass straight through the top. Now, this is not the ideal solution. Originally planned, those blow-through floors were meant to be condos, luxury condos, expensive condos. Starting price for a condo here at the St. Regis, right around $1 million. Million. Yeah, I agree. That's too much for a condo. I don't care how great your view is. I'm sure it's incredible up there, but if you just want to stay for a night or two, they also have the St. Regis Hotel there at the bottom. You're still paying pretty pennies if you ride around $1,000 per night, just depending on the season. Okay, so maybe you want something a little bit more budget conscious. I certainly do. That's why I suggest the Swiss Hotel. Beautiful location, very close to the river as well. Now you can notice with the design of this building, the peak of the structure is facing towards the water. It's actually a triangle-shaped building designed by architect Harry Weiss. Almost looks like a giant box of Toblerone chocolates. Now, Harry Weiss loves triangles within his architecture. We're going to talk about why a little bit later on, because we're going to see some more. The tower is incredible, also designed by Jeannie Gang. So the St. Regis was from 2020. This one's from about 2009. The wave-like pattern is inspired by the natural formation of limestone outcroppings along Lake Michigan, and it's ultimately meant to complement Chicago's waterways. The waves also serve as unique balconies for the residents of Aqua as well. You have a similar situation going on with hotel towards the bottom. The middle space is going to be rented there, and the top area is going to be those bought-out condominiums. So, that is some fairly new architecture just to get us started here. But we're going to be doing some ping pong, jumping from time period to time period. So we're going all the way back now to about 1929. Taking a look here to our right-hand side, you're going to see this onion-shaped dome atop the Chicago Intercontinental Hotel and Athletic Club. Now, the dome at the top that you see is just a nice Moorish accent piece, but sitting just behind that is a chimney, and attached to the chimney is a tiny bit of metal. The metal is the remnants of what used to be an old Zeppelin dock, a dock for blimps. That's because back then we were really betting on the fact that blimp travel was going to be the next fancy way to get around town, right? Then all hopes of blimp travel blew up with the Hindenburg disaster, so we were like, okay, never mind. So the dock at the Chicago Intercontinental has never been put to use, but remnants still exist there. I'm getting toasty. Now, as we keep on moving, we're going to stick with the 1920s, a little bit earlier on though. Initial headquarters. So the building here is broken up into two sections. The left-hand side is from about 1921 with the expansion to the right in 1924. The whole building designed by architecture firm Graham, Anderson, Probst & White. Now the style that we're taking a look at reviving it here in our city, and specifically the clock tower is modeled after the Geraldo Bell Tower of the Cathedral de Sevilla. You can notice some beautiful ornamentation, and you can also see the building itself is surrounded in about 250,000 terracotta clay tiles in 6 different shades of white, or that nice pink color. Also, the way that we light up this building in the evening is meant to harken back to the World's Fair of 1893. Is anyone familiar with the World's Fair that we hosted here in Chicago? We got a couple, incredible, not the rest, that's all right. We're going to talk all about that story a little bit later on in the South Branch, so stay tuned for that. But as we keep on moving along, coming up just in front of us, we saw number 3. If you take a look, there are 3 unique setback patio balconies, each one designed to roughly match the height of surrounding buildings in this area. You can also notice here how the first setback is designed to match the setback of the Wrigley building behind us. They're meant to line up. The top right-hand side, that one's meant to match the height of this black box building behind you. Actually, if we take a look across the river, we can see one of them right over here with the 4 water pylons in each corner. That's known as the Jeweler's Building, a Beaux-Arts-style structure from about 1927. Now, they used to be the water suppression system for the building itself, very important, especially with things like the Great Chicago Fire. We'll talk about that. But it's known as the Jeweler's Building because when it first opened, roughly 75% of the space consisted of retail jewelers. And the other percentage was mainly a 22-floor car elevator, so the jewelers could drive straight into the building. They would drop them off where that retail space was located. Now, the top dome or cupola up there also used to be something known as the Stratosphere Club. Yeah, it's rumored to have been a speakeasy run by Al Capone. Now, it's more of just a rumor rather than the truth. As far as we can tell from all the spreadsheets and documents, by the time Capone was already in prison in the 1930s for tax fraud. So, who's to say it's just a rumor, but the Jeweler's Building. Now, back here to our right-hand side, we can see a pair of residential high-rises known as Marina City. Now, Marina City dates back to the 1960s. See, 1960 Chicago, very different than 2020 Chicago. I mean, back in the 1960s, the environment downtown was far more industrial, with things like steel mills, factories, and distilleries. And the river itself was still kind of polluted, stinky, industrial serving. So it didn't make for the most pleasant living environment, which is much different than what you see around us here today. But that meant if you were a developer or an architect, you had to do a lot of heavy lifting to try to get people to want to live near this location. And so an architect by the name of Bertrand Goldberg designed Marina City with that in mind. And he got all these amenities put it very close to the residents. Grocery stores, shopping centers, restaurants. You got a dock for your boat and valet parking for your car at the base of each one of the residential towers. Also some fun recreational activities. For example, there's a first tower connected to the side of the second tower. There's a music venue known as the Chicago House of Blues. Live concerts going there all summer long. And we do get questions every now and then with those with the parking structure at the bottom. Has anyone ever driven off the side into the water down below? Yes, but it was intentionally done for the sake of a movie. Yeah, filming for The Hunter with Steve McQueen. All practical effects, driving off the side into the river. So, lots of crazy stuff in Marina City. It's been featured heavily with pop culture, movies, album covers, that sort of thing. All right, now coming up here to our left. First off, you can see Tiny Tap, great place to grab yourself a drink next to this water. We're going just behind it with the white granite building with reflective glass. That's known as 77. There's a couple of things. You might call it postmodernism, that definitely fits, but I like to call it modern classical, where architect Ricardo Bofill is combining these newer and older elements. For example, white granite with reflective glass, the white granite rises to the very top of the building, and the roof is designed to look like a Greek temple and the Parthenon. People just call that one the Parthenon on steroids. Yeah, you can definitely see it. All right, so that's a great bit of architecture from all these different time periods to get us started. But now, I also want to acknowledge Chicago's infrastructure. Now, what I mean by that are these bridges we're passing underneath. So, the style of bridges that you're mainly going to be seeing here today are known as trunnion vestibule or drawbridges. They work with a weight and counterweight system. And we'll see a pretty good visual of how those all function a little bit later on in the North Branch here. But we have about 37 movable bridges in total, 18 of which are the trunnion vestibule style. The rest are going to be mainly lift bridges. But then also, coming up above one of these bridges connected to it, not LaSalle Street, but the Wells Street Bridge, you're going to also see an example of our elevated train lines, the L trains. Yeah, they add a lot of personality to downtown Chicago, and they also serve as a transit system. Now, it's actually quite fascinating how it's all designed, because Chicago has these industrial routes. So, with our trains specifically, all but one of our L trains feeds into downtown Chicago. It has to pass through the loop area, quite literally right over here, where all the trains make a big loop and then head north, south, and west of here. And the main reason for that is because working class people back in the day, they were living not downtown, north, south, and west, and so they needed that easy access. But we built everything off of that. So, along with our buses, that serves as Chicago's public transit. And I will say, still today, our rail system specifically ranks number 3 in annual ridership, just behind New York City and Washington, D.C. And we're really hoping we can keep it going, because we have an almost $800 million budget deficit that we're trying to make up for right now. So take our public transit around town. It's going to help us out. That's how I get to and from work every day. Works out pretty well. Now back on track here to our right, a massive building from about 1930. Now originally this was a furniture showcase and furniture warehouse space for Marshall Fielding Company. You might know them nowadays as Macy's department store. But this is a primetime example of Art Deco architecture. We're going to be seeing a lot of this style on the tour. So you have these deep inset windows, polished limestone as the main exterior material, vertical pinstripe columns drawing your eyes up to the top meant to elongate the building and give you a sense of scale, magnitude, and luxury. The main focus with this Art Deco style is mainly to parallel the prosperity of the 1920s, economically speaking at least, during a time when things were going pretty darn well in that regard, and then it all came crashing down with the stock market crash in 1929, and then that had a huge effect on the architecture moving forward after Art Deco. So we'll see a lot more Art Deco buildings on the tour later. All right, we're moving into Wolf Point. This area of the river is where the north-south around us. And you see this upside-down pencil-shaped building? We're going to talk about that later, so just lock that in the back of your head. For now, I want to start here to the right. This is Salesforce Tower from about 2023, so brand new. And then to either side of that, you have some development from the late 2010s with Wolf Point East and West. Now, to the left of all that development, directly in front of us on the river, also L trains passing through. Pretty cool to see. Like I said, right? Great photo opportunity. But yes, just in front of us here, this is River Point Tower. I like to call that one the Hot Pocket building, because it looks like a giant Hot Pocket to me. I don't know. What do you think it looks like? On the back side, you can also see that red spiral. Now, that red spiral is designed by an architect named Santiago Calatrava. It's known as the Constellation. So, Santiago Calatrava is an architect who is supposed to have a full located next to Lakeshore Drive on the main branch of the river. It was planned out to be 2,000 feet tall, and construction was already well underway. It's going to be known as the Chicago Spire. And it was going to hold the record as the tallest skyscraper in the Northern Hemisphere. What happened? Well, 2008, everything was canceled due to the recession and, housing market crash. So all that kind of took an effect on things. Completely canned. We never got any of Santiago Calatrava's skyscrapers in Chicago. The only thing we have of his here in our city today is that. I know, it's disappointing, isn't it? It's not a building. It's not very tall, but it's better than nothing, so I'm happy I can at least give him a shout out of what he was supposed to have here in our city. All right, so as we travel up the north branch of the river, we're going to see a couple of things coming up. So get through all that, and then leading into the 1940s, that was World War II, right? So you had roughly 2 decades worth of time where there just was not a lot of new architecture popping up in downtown Chicago, because we had some other things to think about. It was not finally until the 50s and 60s when we saw that architecture spark up again, but it was completely different than before. Because you see, an architect by the name of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe fled Nazi Germany, settled in Chicago in 1938, and he pioneered this new style, really pushed us forward. You see, in the 50s and 60s, this was his mega style that took over downtown Chicago. Here to the right, This is known as black box modernism. Wow. Now, modernism was this whole movement and a completely different philosophy within the architecture. Ludwig Mies van der Rohe basically said, I can give you a functional building, and it's a fraction of the cost of those expensive and fancy Art Deco buildings. Well, if you are a developer post-World War in Chicago, sure, why not? So this style becomes popular around town. Now, I also like to call black box modernism the true iPhone of architecture, because it is this more simplistic and functional design, but also inspires a lot of new architecture to spark back up in downtown Chicago, and it really got the ball rolling. It's like going through a dusty old drawer and finding an iPhone or iPhone 3G, like one of the originals, right? You can appreciate what we used to have and also appreciate that we don't have it nowadays, and by modern standards, it does look a little bit dated. So, we'll move along in time from the 50s and 60s into the 1970s. We can now say goodbye to a boring black box building and say hello to the sequel, the boring white box building. Yeah, they kind of go hand in hand. It's like comparing an iPhone 3G to an iPhone 3GS and you're really just sitting there trying to spot the difference. Not too much has changed. So in this case, you have a slightly different material, color, and quality of the water down below. You can also see how the curve of that building is designed to match the upcoming curve of the South Branch. Then in between it all, you also have the Mid-America Commodity Exchange. Anyone recognize those X-shaped braces? Same structural braces that are being used for the John Hancock building. Yeah. We don't get a very good view of that one on the tour, so I give the Mid-America Commodity Exchange a shout out instead. Now back here to our left-hand side, you can see 300 South Wacker. This is from about 1969. The concrete slab on the back side has always been there. It serves as support for the elevator shaft, which runs through the middle of the structure. For a long time, it was left blank, and then in the early 2010s, new owners moved in. They were like, let's do something with it. So they turned it into a giant map of the South Branch of the river.